Hey everyone. It's raining in Arizona today, which is absolutely wild. I think this is maybe like the second or third day of rain that we've had in the past 3 months. So what that means is you might hear some thunder or lightning in the background and maybe like some pitter patter of little drops hitting my patio out here. And it also means that my hair is just trying to curl itself everywhere. But honestly, it's just these two little horns here by my ears. They're not used to the humidity. This week, against my better judgment, I've been talking about my escape from MAGA. And I've had a lot of questions about what made me leave. So today, in this totally unscripted video, I'm going to dive into the steps leading up to and then what it was that finally pushed me to decide that I was no longer Republican, no longer conservative, and break up with Donald J. Trump and the entire Make America Great Again train. And no, it wasn't Epstein. I broke up with this guy long before that. Let's talk about my life. Take 2.
Ready on the set? Let's try this again.
I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take 2. First, look at this. It's a puddle. Wow. I don't even know what these things are up there in the sky. There's water falling out of them. This is very unusual behavior for the Arizona sky. My bird of paradise is so happy right now. Look at it. First, I want to thank you for stopping on my channel here for a minute. And I really want to thank everyone who's been engaging in my comment section. This is an interesting topic. And I feel like in America right now, we're in such political upheaval. And a lot of people are questioning, and a lot of people are on journeys of their own. And it's been really beautiful to hear about some of those journeys in the comment section. So thank you so much for sharing. So how did I leave not just MAGA, not just being a Trump voter, but Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and a massive religious community? To answer that question, I'm going to have to start with just a quick synopsis of my life. I was born and raised into the Mormon church, and I had a deeply devout, very heavily indoctrinated family. Most of my life was spent really just in this little protective bubble where I wasn't allowed to date outside of the Mormon church. I wasn't supposed to hang out with friends outside of the Mormon church. All of my information was very much controlled by my community, and that kept me just very carefully protected. I then met my now ex-husband at age 19, was married at age 20, and would spend 24 years until age 44, again, very much living in an echo chamber. That echo chamber was rich-ass country club gated communities in Mesa, Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, surrounded by a really Mormon dense population and a very religious population outside of just Mormonism. I came from a huge family, and honestly, I only had like 1 or 2 friends as an adult that weren't members of the Mormon church. I feel like unless you've been Mormon, it's really difficult to understand how that a high demand religion like that really flavors every aspect of your life. Everything was filtered through my religion. I have some friends who are Orthodox Jews. I've had friends who are Jehovah's Witness and Scientologists and Amish and former Mennonites who they are the only ones who even come close to what my growing up and the first 44 years of my life was like. And I just want to contrast that to other religions where it's just like, go on Sunday, read your Bible, and you know that Jesus saved you. My partner, Kevin, spent most of his life going to a Lutheran church, very heavily involved in Lutheranism. And it's not that he left the Lutheran church, but he's transitioned into attending a non-denominational church. That didn't change his life at all. Going from a Lutheran church to a non-denominational church, nothing changed. Whereas for me, every aspect of my life, from what I did 7 days a week, the music that I listened to, the food that I ate, dietary restrictions imposed by the Mormon church, 10% of our gross income going to the Mormon church, and constant service requirements within our congregations because there's no paid clergy, the number of children that I had, who I married, the thoughts in my head, who I voted for, the underwear that I wore, literally the fabric, 24/7, pressing up against my lady parts, was dictated by my church. I've been out of the church now for 7 years. I left Mormonism in October of 2018. And it's interesting looking back on my old Mormon self, and especially this week going through my Facebook page to pull some of these MAGA posts that I put up. It's interesting how much I was trying to be a good person and love others and follow Jesus and Heavenly Father. And yet, what a monster I was inside. I hated everybody. I judged everybody. I was racist as hell. I didn't want my kids to hang out with non-members because they were evil. And I didn't know at the time how much my religion was making me hate people. But one day that would come to the forefront. And this really is the beginning step of my journey out of MAGA and everything else. This is where it all kind of collapsed. And it started off as just a really random day for me. One day at age 44, I woke up with my husband, Jake, and 2 of our kids, age 8 and 14. And it was Sunday morning. We were just getting ready for church. Now, I was going through some really difficult things after 24 years of domestic violence and then discovering that my Mormon Reformed missionary had a double that I don't want to really dive into on this video. I do tons of other videos on what that looked like and how that impacted me. But I was at a place in my life where church to me was supposed to be this oasis of peace and love. And the people within my religious community were supposed to be that rock for me. I needed them to be my safe harbor. And on this particular Sunday, it was just 6 weeks after I had reconciled with Jake after 3 years of on and off separation as we dealt with his stuff. And that first 6 weeks with him was very precarious. We hadn't lived together for 3 years. And I was really needing more peace, love, happiness, and stability at that time in my life than I had before. So I remember doing my makeup in the bathroom and curling my hair and getting the kids breakfast and everything that morning. We were hustling to get off to church that day and really just having this expectation of once I get to church, I'm going to have some inspiration. I'm going to be around all these beautiful people and it's going to be that safe harbor in the storm. And instead, church that day was so hateful. Mormon church is 3 hours long. The whole 3 hours was hateful, but the last hour was where I snapped. For the last hour of church, the men and women separate. Men go to their priesthood class, women go to their Relief Society class, and then the children are off in their youth groups and their children's ministry. So I went to the Relief Society meeting and just having this feeling of I'm going to be surrounded in all this happiness, and I hope that we have a really inspiring lesson so that I can leave here and for the next week just have that fuel to get me through what's going to be a difficult week, week 7 of reconciliation with a man who had harmed me for many years and a very problematic situation. So that was my expectation sitting in class. And then the teacher introduces the lesson, and the lesson is on the evils of homosexuality. And that first little 10 minutes of her lesson, she was talking about her sister-in-law who is bisexual and all the reasons why this sister-in-law was basically going to hell and what an evil person she was, and just personally attacking this total stranger that none of us knew. And all I felt was, this is so hateful. I have so much stuff already going on in my life. I'm dealing with really dark things, and there's enough hate out there in the world. This was supposed to be my refuge, and the lesson itself, the doctrine of the church, and these people sitting here in this class are not that at all. It's almost like I saw them for the first time. And yes, ironically, I had always believed that homosexuality was a sin. And I don't know in that moment that I necessarily grappled with that topic and thought, maybe it's not such a sin. All I saw was a group of humans heaping hate on, I think that the girl in the story, the sister-in-law, was a 22-year-old who again was a total stranger that none of us knew. And just sitting back, almost like having this out-of-body experience of that group think and that othering and discrimination against somebody as we dehumanized a total stranger just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I stood up and I told them, I said, I'm leaving. I'm not getting a drink. I'm not going to the bathroom. I'm leaving the Mormon church, and I have never been back. 44 years of Mormonism. So I grabbed my purse and I left. I did turn to this little 23-year-old teacher and I told her, generations of my family will not be Mormon, like my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids, because of this lesson this day. And I just want you to know that. And then I walked out the door of that classroom, and there was a little drinking fountain against the wall in the corner right outside the room. And I stood there and I texted Jake and I said, I need you to meet me by the drinking fountain, by the Relief Society room. We need to talk. So a few minutes later, Jake comes out, and this was the conversation that I had with him. I said, if you were going to the Mormon church today for the first time, if you're church shopping, this is your first date with a religion, would you want a second date? Would you want to come back to this church? And he was like, no, absolutely not. Like, our lesson is hateful. The whole 3 hours has been horrible. No, if you put it like that, no, I wouldn't. And I said, me either. We'll talk about it in the car and let's go get the kids. We're leaving. And I'm leaving the church. And Jake was just like, wait, what? So we go get in the car, and I spent the whole week just really grappling with, do I want to be part of this community that's so hateful? And because of that moment, I then was looking back at all of these other moments in my life, and both the doctrine of the church, the teachings of the clergy, the bishops and the prophets and Sunday school teachers and things like that, and then just my interactions with the community, and everything just started to hit me. All of this hate, like our investing money in fighting Prop 8 so that gay people couldn't get married and have a life partner. The hatred that I had towards, as a white supremacist, and this is church doctrine, that black skin was a curse from God. My fear and hatred of anyone who had brown skin, whether they were from India, whether they were African American, whether they were Mexican. It was almost like that week I could just see all of these dots kind of connecting. And I started to get this big picture of what my life was inside of this organization. And I knew that I just couldn't do it anymore. Leaving the Mormon religion took me exactly 2 weeks from that moment. That week, I just started to look at things from a distance. The next Sunday, we went to a Christian church, and my ex-husband is still part of this Christian church. It was very loving. It's an incredible church. They are very LGBTQ supporting. They have support groups for women who've had abortions. They are kind, amazing people. And that first Sunday that we went to a non-Mormon church, and the pastor was just truly talking about love and support and working communally as humans, it was mind-boggling. And Jake and I both knew in that moment, standing in that church, that we could never go back to the Mormon church again. And then the next week, I would start digging into Mormon history, and I would start looking at polygamy, which I never knew the depth of polygamy within the Mormon church. And I started looking at the truth claims of the Book of Mormon itself and modern revelations that hadn't been fulfilled. And 2 weeks after that walkout, I would resign from the Mormon church, putting a stop with my children to 7 generations that my children are descended from the very foundations of Mormonism on that side of the family, 5 generations on my side, and the buck stopped with me. 2 weeks later, my marriage would end, and my whole entire life would collapse. And I would be left with absolutely nothing. And that shift is a lot of what opened me up to stepping away from the Trump train, the MAGA movement, and ultra-conservative, because my life before was very privileged. I was living in $1 million homes. We were vacationing all over the country. I had everything I wanted. I could drop a $100 bill. I wouldn't even take the time to bend over and pick it up. We had so much for so long. And suddenly my life collapsing made me see the other side. I would be sleeping in my car, and then I would no longer have that car. I would no longer have anything. I had absolutely nothing. I lost everything in my divorce. And for the first time, I was sitting in the DES office applying for food stamps. And I was picking up food boxes from a Catholic charity so that I could feed my kids. And it's crazy the stuff that people donate to, like, food pantries. It was like canned beans and canned green beans and macaroni and cheese and soup. And we were so happy to just have that soup. Like, that's all we had. And I honestly don't know if I would be the person that I am today if my ex-husband hadn't paid alimony, if he hadn't forced me into homelessness, if I hadn't had 3 years of absolute struggle. I don't know that it would have been enough to wake me up. And my new friends are Navajo and Japanese and Black. And of course, I live in Arizona, so lots of Mexicans and atheist, Buddhist, Jewish, like everything. My friend group became this beautiful melting pot. My friend group became this beautiful melting pot for the first time in my life because I wasn't just friends with the people in my ward. I actually know all of my neighbors. Now, I did go from Mormonism straight into throwing myself into Jesus, and I would spend 4.5 years deeply immersed in Christianity, sometimes going to like multiple Bible study groups a week, because I felt like the Mormon church had like kept me from knowing Jesus. So it's like, oh, I can finally have a relationship with Jesus without like the Book of Mormon in the way. So that's kind of where I was until 2 years ago. And coincidentally, my leaving MAGA happened at the same time that I left Christianity and broke up with Jesus. And I don't think that that could have happened in any other way either. So I started to have all of these diverse friends and read diverse thoughts, and my brain was being flooded with stuff that it had never even considered before. And then I started grappling with everything that I had been taught in my church about race, that a white God made a white Adam and Eve and put them in the Garden of Eden, and then Cain and Abel, and so he cursed Cain with brown skin. I still believed that up until like 3 or 4 years ago. And then I made a couple of black friends. There are a lot of black people in the Mormon church. I'd never had a black friend. And they're amazing. Like, they're some of my favorite people in the world. And because I connected with them on such a deep personal level, I started to question race theory. And it's like, well, now that I'm learning actual science and data, what do we know about race? And what were the origins of brown skin, dark hair, brown eyes? So I started reading genetics studies, and lo and behold, I discovered that humans were brown forever. And that the blonde hair, blue eye, white skin thing is really new, like 6,000 years old. And it's not because anybody was cursed or not cursed or better than somebody else. It's because humans migrated to northern climates. I'm descended from people who inhabited Scandinavia and Germany, and it was cold as hell up there. So that's why we're blonde. I remember the moment literally laying in my bed and going through all of these studies on genetics and the blonde blue gene mutation and how new it was. And I felt like the whole entire world just fell out from under me. And in that moment, I could no longer be a white supremacist. It just went away. Like, I read and reread little details, like how the kinky curly hair, like the afro, protects the scalp from intense sun. Well, that makes sense if people are in Africa, or the Fertile Crescent. By the way, the Mormon church taught me that Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, was in Jackson County, Missouri. So it made sense to me that Adam and Eve would be white because Missouri. This little era of deconstructing my racism, I suddenly was doing tons of TikTok videos on deconstructing racism. And like, I remember one day just going to the farmer's market here in my hometown in Arizona and looking at Mexican families with their little kids in strollers and African Americans. And we have a lot of refugees here in my hometown. I have no idea where they're from, actually, but people who were nothing like me, and just thinking how beautiful they were and thinking how marvelous genetics are, that dark skin protects people from intense UV exposure and from picking up too much vitamin D, and seeing the world in a totally different way and feeling completely different on the inside. That day, going to that farmer's market for the first time in my entire life, because I had been indoctrinated as a white supremacist, I almost felt this barrier between myself and other people just evaporate. And it is important to point out that I was doing so much work myself. So as I'd have these aha moments and learn something, then I would go to my therapist and like, let's talk about racism. And I'd get books on breaking down racism and helping to understand and really kind of checking myself, and then asking my friends too, talking to my Black friends about just how to be an okay human. And also during all of this, I was learning to let go of judgment and empathize with other people in a way that I really never had before. So if I was watching a movie about Harriet Tubman, then rather than looking at that as them and their experience and their history, I was learning to connect with the stories of humans. And I don't know how to explain this, but like, what if I was Harriet Tubman? What if I was any of these people in this story who were going through this, rather than that was them, that wasn't me? As I was learning and deconstructing and picking up every little bit of my worldview and my behaviors that had been just forced on me in my deeply indoctrinated childhood, I began to also deconstruct the Bible, and I was having more and more problems with the new Christian religious community that I was part of and their hatred towards gay people and just so many people. And I began to really look at the Bible differently. I feel like the Old Testament is the worst thing in the world, and I never wanted it in my home, so I actually deleted it off of my phone. And I just didn't like the New Testament either. I didn't like any of it, and I don't believe that any of it is true. I don't believe that it's valid. I see no evidence for God. And as I deconstructed, I would eventually deconstruct everything. And 2 years ago, leave the Christian church. The next big thing to collapse was gender roles. I was still very much living in this traditional family structure with my new partner. I got rid of Jake and we divorced. I met Kev, and I was doing all of the cooking and the cleaning, and he was the provider, and that worked out great, except that I still felt very small. And then I started to read books on the science of the genetics of male and female, and do males have genes that make them more protective, and do females have instincts that make them better cooks? And as I really evaluated everything, this one big thing leapt out at me, that we live in a patriarchal system that has taught us a bunch of lies. And I looked at my own life and my aptitude and the things that I had the potential to do, and how that I really wasn't cut out to be a mommy at all. The whole trad wife thing was completely contrary to my nature, and it wasn't serving me in my home anymore. And I literally just started binge reading every feminist book that I could get a hold of. And I remember one afternoon walking into a little local bookstore here after having lunch with Kev and hitting this feminist section about just like girls are humans too, like really basic stuff, and getting goosebumps and literally crying and thinking, I hate feminists. Like, they're so gross. Like, women's lib is destroying our country. But it felt so good to just sit down at a little table in this bookstore and examine some of these books, and then buy a couple, take them home with me, and realize, oh shit. And then all the therapy around that, and then coming home and changing what I'm doing in my house. Like, I'm sorry, honey, but I'm not going to cook all the food anymore, and I'm not going to do all the grocery shopping. It's not my job to do this or that. And here's what I actually want to be doing, with no education, with no work experience ever. My last job had been when I was like a 19-year-old girl. But I want to build a life for myself, and here's how I'm going to do it. And it doesn't matter if I'm a girl or not. Pink and blue is fake. And right as I'm stepping into feminism and atheism, we have a presidential election. And I never thought I had to think about my politics. Like, clearly Donald Trump is the only guy to lead the country. And I follow him on Instagram, and I follow him everywhere. And I'm part of the MAGA movement. I have a t-shirt. Like, of course, this is the only way to go. The Republicans are the only sane people in the country. And the Democrats are nuts. Like, Joe Biden is ridiculous. Kamala Harris is the devil herself. And then Roe v. Wade gets overturned. And that shook. And honestly, in some of Trump's pre-campaign stuff, just watching some of the crowd that followed him, it was almost like I was back there in my Mormon church that Sunday having this out-of-body experience. And I started to ask that same question. If this was the first time that I was trying out a political group and a political party and a political candidate, if this was like our first date, would I want a second date? If I hadn't been MAGA since the beginning of MAGA, if I hadn't voted for Trump all those years and followed Trump and like really worshiped Trump, I was on the Trump train 100%, believed that God was behind him. If I hadn't done all that, would I? And the answer was absolutely no. As he talked about immigrants in New Jersey eating cats and dogs. And now I had Black friends, and he makes a statement about Black jobs. And I might have just fallen for that before, but my Black friends were college professors, highly educated artists, business owners. So like they had better jobs than me. I was on food stamps at the time. And then honestly, I think the thing that broke me the most was that over on my TikTok, where I had 400,000 followers, I was talking about women's rights. I was talking about feminism. I was talking about equality in marriage and just not being a racist jerk. And I was getting so much hate from conservatives. The comments were just insane. And I saw the ugliness, the hate, and the fear up close and personal. And I wasn't part of the in crowd anymore. I was on the receiving end of the hate and the fear. And I couldn't ignore it. So one night I laid in bed reading about political platforms and what is a Democrat and what is a Republican and what does MAGA stand for and what does Trump stand for and what did Joe Biden do, and tell me about Barack Obama, who I had secretly voted for. And honestly, I felt like it was a coming out of the closet type of moment, lying there in bed realizing, oh shit, I'm a Democrat. And I didn't even know it. Not only am I a Democrat, but I am like this woke, feminist, atheist, anti-theist, fighting against religion. So of course, you know what the next step is going to be. Therapy, therapy, therapy. Reaching out to my new community and asking for feedback. Like, what do you guys think about this? And what do you think about the fact that I think this? And then books, books, books. Study, study, study. And part of that studying has been being part of a political campaign. I kind of landed in the RFK camp for a little bit. And so I was volunteering with a local little campaign group here in my hometown. It's been really interesting too, not having like that church bubble where other people are giving me the information. I have access to information, and I've been really taking advantage of that. So I've been going to local town halls, getting to know our local mayor, like literally following her on social media, reading articles about her, reading her whole history of who she is and everything, and some of the controversies surrounding her, and getting to know all of the candidates in this election that we had yesterday. I guess for the first time in my life, accessing all of the full political rights that I always had access to and never really took advantage of, because it really hit me what a unique experience it is to live in the United States of America in the year 2015. You guys, I said that incorrectly on another video. So now we're in 2015 now in every single video. I don't know if I'll ever say 2025 again. Like, this is such a unique experience for us not to be under a monarchy, not to be in some type of a theocracy, like a pharaoh, divine emperor. Like, we have a really unique opportunity as citizens to interface with our government and to form and shape it. And I had never done that before. And it's kind of funny, like I have this little allegory in my head for it. When I was like a teenager growing up and my doctor would ask me, are you sexually active? And the answer was no, I'm not. And then I got married and I was. I feel like I've been a political virgin. Like, I was never really politically active. And now I am. And politics and our government and the leaders who are guiding us are very much a part of my thoughts on a fairly regular basis. And by the way, after I broke up with MAGA, I did send a letter to the White House after Trump's inauguration and let him know that I was a lifelong conservative, lifelong Republican, longtime Trump supporter, and long-term MAGA. And I listed out the reasons why I'd broken up with him, why I was disillusioned with him as a human being and as a leader. And I told him goodbye. He never wrote back. It was kind of weird. But you know who did reach out to me? Was Cory Booker's office. I don't want to talk about it right now, but they called. So thank you. And I hope to be interviewing Ms. Fox from District 7 here in my hometown in Arizona. She did lose the election last night, but she was running against a formidable force that it would have been a little bit of an uphill battle, but she's incredible. I already have a yes from Deja Fox. I'm just waiting to hear on the date. So can friends or family of yours step out of MAGA? I'm sure they absolutely can. And they may just leave MAGA. They may just switch out of Trump and then leave the rest of their hateful, religiously superior, white supremacist, really toxic ideology in place there. Like, maybe they won't even change that, but they just stop voting for Trump. Or maybe they deconstruct a little bit here and there, but maybe just like me, they have that life take two moment and everything crumbles and they step into the light. And I will say, if I was going to give just one little bit of advice here, that if you want your MAGA family members to see the light. Arguing with them politically is absolutely not the way to do it, because then they just double down. That would have made me just dig deeper. The things that kind of stumped me were the really nice atheists, the amazing Democrats, the super sweet feminists. Be the light. Like, I guess just showed basic human decency, kindness, and love. And certainly it's important for us to argue policies and to fight to preserve freedom. But that's not always the most helpful thing with an individual. Anyway, I think that's it in a nutshell. And I will be hanging out comments. I will be answering a couple of questions on Friday. So if you have some more specific questions for me, drop those down there. And I just want to conclude with this. I don't think that Make America Great Again should be a hat or a t-shirt or a movement. And it should just be what we all do on an everyday basis. That should be the given. Bye, guys.